Yeah, all right. I'm the only one watching right now, but somebody will watch this later, and so welcome. Doing a Q&A this week, a little bit of live streaming, but already got some folks born in, and yeah, I'm just going to chat and banter with myself really for a few minutes while folks start coming in, but we we are all affected in some way by COVID here on the WebDM plane, and we didn't want to skip another week after the holidays, and so here we are going to do a live stream Q&A. Normally we do these for our our patrons and our immortal level patrons over on our Patreon, but figured like, hey, let's throw it out to all of our viewers this week. See what you guys are curious about, what questions you have, and I was going to answer some of my faves. So I hope I get to I hope I get through all of my favorites, let alone everybody's. Probably won't get through everybody's. Probably won't even get through all my favorites. But yeah, I'm going to be on here for a while, so let's hang out. We got Emma in the chat from the WebDM account, and here in just a minute or so, I'll start answering y'all's questions. And yeah, give me just a second. I have so many tabs open. So there's a reason why I like. There's a reason why I like doing these things with a partner and a co-pilot, just because it cuts down on the distractions that are going on. So I'm going to close some windows so I can give you guys my full attention, and yeah, we'll get to those questions. So here we go, minimizing distractions at the moment because that is how my brain works. Give me just a second. Makes for scintillating live stream, doesn't it? You guys just tuned in to watch someone just manage their windows for the first 2 minutes of live stream. All right, here we go. We're going to start off here, and this one was my personal favorite of all of them. No shade to those of you who asked questions; they were all very good. A big theme from some of them was, like, we could see it was like prep, or like how to prep for long-term campaigns or keep track of what goes on in a session. We have a show coming out for that as soon as we can film it. And so that'll be here hopefully sometime into January, early February-ish. But this question from George was easily my favorite because it so rarely comes up. And I wanted to make sure that, well, I think it's a good one to start with. All right, so George asks, as a biologist, I always ask this question. Does evolution exist as a concept in your D&D settings? Are any of the organisms subject to the same processes as in our world, or do you just hand wave it and say that gods made the animals and plants? Evolution absolutely exists in my D&D worlds. I assume sort of a baseline, just my thumbnail, top of the Wikipedia article, depth of knowledge about most scientific knowledge, just to be the baseline, because it's like, I like the idea of magic laid on top of that, like magic that works with the forces and principles that we've learned through the scientific method. And especially like the more complex a system gets, right? Like the more interesting I think you can find something there. Like for me, Lamarckian inheritance is one of those things that I think is interesting to play around with in a fantasy setting where a being's form, their shape, their physical characteristics can be altered by magic and changed either temporarily or permanently. Like I find the idea that could be heritable, that they could then pass on those changes to their offspring. And like one of my D&D settings is essentially based around this concept of trying to produce the perfect sorcerer, saying like, who can we make magic users? Can we become as a people so infused with magic that we don't need spell books anymore? We don't need any of it. We can just like work magic with our sheer will. And they're attempting to do that over the course of, centuries and millennia to create this in themselves. And like, to me, that's interesting. I like the idea that like these forces are at play in the world and magic's laid on top of it. And then the gods and everything else is laid on top of that. And it lets me do all these weird kind of things like have adventures in between atoms, or deal with like the deep time, like deep geological time in your campaign setting, and go like, well, what if all the oil in my campaign world is just like compressed trolls, like they can't be killed, like they're just going to keep regenerating down there, but the heat and the pressure keeps them in this ooze like state that can be extracted and alchemically processed into an efficient fuel kind of thing. So I love the mixing of all of it. Pseudoscience, pseudohistory, that's on the table too, especially because those tend to be more outlandish. So yeah, I really like that. I like finding ways to blend it in. And I think it's a shame that there's not enough like inspiration drawn from, or at least my perception is not enough inspiration drawn from like the real world knowledge that we have about our own world for like, hey, let's imagine for a minute, what if we interjected some magic into this situation? So yeah, love the question, absolutely. And I try to incorporate those things in my game all the time. I think you guys might see a theme for some of these first few questions, if only because I found them very like fascinating in terms of like either the specificity of the question or like the topic of it, or it touched something on a topic that I really liked. So here's the next one. This one's from Austin. It says, in February, I'm wanting to run a one-shot for some friends, most who have never played D&D or any other TTRPG before. Do you have any recommendation for a pre-written one that would work well? And if not, do you have any tips for running a one-shot for new players? Also curious for any one-shot tips you have in general. Never really DM'd before, so anything would be appreciated. Thanks. So first off, awesome. This is great. Listen, no one's ever played. Like you have a clean slate, as it were, in terms of expectations. And I think like lean into that. Really what you're looking for in this first session of a one shot with people who've never played before is to get through like one or two things, right? So presumably you're familiar enough with RPGs, having played them this first time DMing. We're talking about like a small or short easy combat encounter, or a series of skill challenges or something, or a role-playing exchange. Like depending on their background for just like fantasy stuff in general, like whether they've played, say, Skyrim or Breath of the Wild or something like that, like then that might like tailor how much fantasy and how much like adventure game elements you bring into it. But for me, like if you're wanting to get them, like show them the best of what the hobby has to offer, I wouldn't worry too much about getting into the minutia of the rule sets. Stick with just the basics of playing, presumably 5e, ability checks, saving throws, just them understanding like this is the ability part of the role, this is the proficiency part of the role. Might be just the one rules hurdle you're trying to get over that session. And then if that's an easy one, then the next one is like, okay, well, let's start mixing these, or let's introduce saving throws, or something like that. But like, to me, the joys of the hobby, the real parts that keep you coming back are the freedom and the ability to like go beyond the bounds of what a video game could offer, or what a more prescribed experience could offer, because like you can present a situation and you don't need to know what the answer is, right? You can just think up a problem or two, some situations that are interesting that you think are going to appeal to your players. Try to connect them as best you can, but don't worry too much about having like rock solid connections. You can just have vague ideas and could be, so even if they're like contradictory, list them all out and have them with you in a set of DM notes that's easy for you to read. Don't have to do a bunch of page flipping. And just like, if you're relaxed and you feel like you've got a solid 3 or 4 interesting things for them to do that feature a variety of typical D&D adventuring type stuff, a little bit of dealing with these problems from this way, a little bit of that, let them figure out how they want to approach them, and then let them reach out into the rules as they play, and really just focus on that core loop of like, I'm going to describe a situation. You're going to tell me what your character does. I'm going to tell you whether you need to roll the dice, whether it just happens, whether there's no way, whatever. And then if they go, well, what about spells? Well, what about magic abilities? Like, we're playing a fantasy game. What about those? When they ask, that's when I would really start introducing those things, and let that first session be much more free flow and just loose. Get used to rolling the dice, get used to looking at a very small, simplified form of a character sheet, maybe just a blank piece of paper with some numbers written on it. Because like D&D can really overwhelm you with details and stuff. And there's like 3 core books, and they're big and they're not like easy reads, and you wouldn't want that to scare them away. That can come later. Just focus on having a good, enjoyable time where you're just throwing out imaginative fantasy situations, and they're coming up with whatever. And as they ask for more rules, as they look for more structure, be ready to introduce it. Don't worry about getting it right. Don't worry about making sure it's perfect. Keep those books closed. Don't crack them open unless everybody is interested in looking at them. And just sort of run much more free flow to get them into it. And then you build up from there. When it seems like they're comfortable, you go, all right, well, here's the rule book. And you guys know how to play. So this will, be much easier on them. So yeah, good luck. As for scenarios, because that's only part of your question, I can't necessarily recommend necessarily 2 of them, or sorry, pre-written ones. My brain got on one track, so I'm trying to steer the train a different direction. And so I appreciate it, Fry Minis. The name Vanderhops, and I don't necessarily have anything pre-written. That would put a lot of work on you, because you would have to like read the whole thing, break it down, which parts are useful, which parts are not. Like, if you have something in your repertoire already, maybe read it and borrow from it. But what I would do is just like think of some situations and scenes. And I'll tell you 2 that I use a lot, that I've run often enough that I pretty much can run them on the fly as sort of loose adventure structures. One of them is pretty simple, and it's there to reinforce a dungeon crawl, which D&D is kind of does well, kind of. And it's there to give a plausible reason to enter a dangerous subterranean environment, and a sort of a time meter, a ticker that makes sure that they don't just like turtle it or meander their way. Like, you want to have a good pace. You want it to feel tense and suspenseful in a race against time. And so it's the local villagers are beseeching the people traveling through, the strangers in town who are armed to the teeth, who look like they can handle themselves, that kind of thing. You don't have to worry about how the party got together at this point. It's one shot, and some people have gone missing in an old ruin of a church. and the catacombs underneath it, and or like a temple or something. And everybody stays away from there. Everybody knows that at some point in the past it was used for something nefarious, and so they just steer clear of it. But like a bunch of kids, just fucking around the woods, sorry, if you guys weren't expecting a blue show, again, we need somebody to rescue them, and we'll give you anything, that kind of desperation could be one. The other is a sort of similar rustic D&D style of like the party's traveling along the side of a road and they see a dead body, and there's like dead grass all around it, bodies of like crows and dead insects, like nothing that's touched it or eaten off of it is living, and it's like been ripped to shreds, looks like it's been killed by a wolf. And this is a werewolf scenario where there's as many red herrings as it seems like the players will tolerate. Sort of a local village nearby, some sketchy people that live on the fringe of the village, maybe. Obvious one is the hunter. Of course the hunter did it, all signs point to it. It's the red herring. It's someone else in the village. Someone's trying to cover up, and the hunter knows who it really is. Maybe I've run that one before. It's more investigative. It's creepier. It plays on a more darker fantasy vibe. But both of those work for good, just sort of setups and frames, because you could have it be like they find the dead body, they go to the first person's house, either the hunter or someone else, and the hunter's like, nope, it's this other person. I have proof. Then the someone else is, finds a way, or now the werewolf knows they're on the trail, so the werewolf attacks. And you just like make sure it's not of a weak werewolf, make sure there's a contrived reason for a silver thing somewhere nearby, or they have a bag of silver coins that you let them weaponize or something, or just like make them higher level and have them have magic weapons and silver weapons already, because they're adventurers, and that's the kind of thing adventurers have. So hope that helps, Austin. Good luck. All right. One of the things I love about these Q&As is by the time I finish reading them and start answering, I've very often realized like, oh, mate, I haven't actually answered the question guys asked. So some tangent shoots up. All right, the next one comes from Andrew. I appreciate the tips, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I am not paying attention to chat, but I do see it out of corner of my eye there. But this one's from Andrew regarding secret roles. Do you feel that your players metagame on perception, investigation, insight check information that the DM gives them based on their role? Do you think that secret roles, that is, that players roll into an area that the DM and not the player can see, or set up the table or something, various ways to roll in secret, right? Do you think that secret roles are beneficial, or do you not let metagaming bother you? I really don't let metagaming bother me too much. What I find, especially as a DM, is if I just tell them, yeah, I don't really care if you metagame, then the players will select their comfort level with metagaming, and it'll change, according to the situation. And that just makes for a smoother game in general. But if metagaming is a priority in that moment, how I do it is I flip the script and I look at their passive scores. Passive investigation is a thing. The thing with 5th edition is like reread the section on passive ability checks in the player's handbook, and it's describing a situation where the character is taking, is concentrating on one thing in particular enough that having to roll dozens and dozens of times would bog the game down and be tedious. We can just assume that they have a 10 plus their modifier. That's how they explained it. Then they used it completely differently, right? But in its initial conception, a passive check is any kind of check that you're making over an extended period of time, right? And so you could be making passive athletics checks over certain periods of rough terrain, just to, you have to be this tall to not be hampered by this environment, kind of, that's how I see it, at least. And so I look at their passive insight and I have my NPC roll deception against it. And if my NPC rolls deception, I do my best to lie in character, at playing the NPC, in such a way that it's convincing. Or I will, and this because I switch frequently in campaigns, this doesn't seem weird, I will just summarize what the NPC says, and then let the player ask questions about that summary to gain as much clarity as they want out of it. But this, like, to me, this is how I justify there even being NPC stats or charisma. Like, otherwise, what's the point of NPCs having charisma other than a saving throw against banishment, right? Like, what's the point of an NPC having deception, or particularly deception is the one I really use it for. I don't intimidate players because I find it just isn't an enjoyable experience for anybody. They'll either be intimidated by the situation or they won't. And so, but deception is one of those where, yeah, their character might have a way of telling something is up, maybe not exactly what's lying, but just that someone's being deceitful. And that's really all insight does for me in my games. It just gives you a hunch that they're holding something back, not what it is. It's not a lie detector, detect thoughts. It's just like, something seems off about this. They seem to be holding back, you know? But yeah, that's how I do it. Same thing for stealth, right? There's passive perception for the party. I roll stealth for the enemies. The players never need to know, right? I roll all my rolls in the open, but they don't know what the rolls are for. So that's the long and short of it. It's how I'm able to ambush parties and have lying NPCs and, you know, all kinds of things. Because I just I flip it, and yeah, that's how I do it. Or I don't roll at all, and I just like role play it out. But you weren't asking about that. So yeah, that's how I handle like secret information if metagaming is a priority. Yeah, good question. All right. This is another one. This next one's another one that's a real favorite. So here we go. What are the differences between a paladin and a cleric? Mechanically, conceptually, lore-wise, I believe the cleric came from Dave Arneson, but where did the paladin come from? And why did they feel the need to make one when they already had the cleric? Very good question. It's similar to a bard that derived from a multi-class in older editions. Is paladin just a better cleric turned into its own class? I have so many questions, as justifiably so. Melamomud 818. So yeah, I really don't know, honestly. The cleric is a merger of Van Helsing from Hammer horror films, which were a bunch of horror movies that Dave Arneson and his players were watching when they were playing Blackmore, that the game would eventually become D&D, or contribute to it at least. Paladin comes later and is clearly from Three Hearts, Three Lions, Paul Anderson's fantasy novel about a World War II Dutch resistance fighter who gets taken to a fantasy version of the past and has to do battle with the forces of chaos represented by fairy. It's where D&D gets the troll. It's where they get a lot of the fairy creatures from. It contributes to law and chaos, along with the Elric of Melbourne Saga. So that's where Paladin comes from. And there's like passages out of Three Hearts, Three Lions where you're like, dude, this sounds like someone's solo Paladin game. Like the guy literally finds full plate, a Holy Avenger, and a magic horse just sitting for him in a glade, waiting for him, you know. I will say, if you ever read it, it has the coolest description of what a just generic D&D troll would be like and why they would be terrifying. I think like it's clear from reading the passage in Three Hearts, Three Lions that you're like, oh, that's how trolls are supposed to be. Like, that's really cool. It's never been like that in play, but that's really cool. So back to the Paladin Cleric. Cleric arises because one of Dave Arneson's characters became a vampire, and they needed a way to deal with a vampire. Before that, they just pretty much played knights and magicians and scoundrels and things. So that's why the cleric is sort of exists in this weird position. And honestly, one of the reasons I love original D&D, even like before any of the supplements, is like there's this trinity of classes. There's the one that fights really well. There's the one that can fight terribly but has magic. And then there's the one that can kind of fight and has some magic. And it's got this trio. You know, the cleric can wield some weapons. They can wear really good armor, crucially, they can't get access to magic swords, which have some very powerful and unique abilities that only fighters can access. And their magic isn't as strong as magic users' spells, but it's also the only way to get hit points back without just taking a week off from the dungeon or the like, and dealing with a lot of the bad news that's in a dungeon. So that's sort of their role in a metagame sense. But like conceptually, they're very weird. Cleric's that merger of Van Helsing and then the historic Knights Templar. And then Paladin is like comes from Charlemagne's palace knights, who were like, you know, those knights that like slept in his bedroom and protected the great emperor as he made progress throughout Francia or something like that, you know. And so like they arrive from like medieval history and you know, medieval romance literature and sort of help inspire D&D, but they're really playing in the same conceptual space. And like the only thing that to me that's like really stood out is the Paladin was a subclass of the fighter that had better stuff if you rolled really well on your stats and wanted to play by this really strict code that was made you like a knight in shining armor, but kind of like meant that everybody else in the party had to play along. And then the cleric was like, you're just going to heal us all day long and not get to do anything cool, you know? So like, I don't know, that to me, they stick out like sore thumbs because like, otherwise it's like Conan and Merlin and, you know, Link from Zelda go on an adventure together. And then it's like, and then also this Christian knight who does holy magic too. It's like, with Conan? Really? And the elf? So yeah, I think it's weird. I do. I have so many questions too, but they're clearly entrenched in fantasy archetypes by now, thanks to D&D. So we're stuck with them. Yeah, there you go. So all right. I hope you're able to sleep at night and this question doesn't haunt you for the rest of your life. I just think I'm gonna take a drink, see how you guys are doing. I'm looking at the chat. It's flying by, or was. Hope you guys are doing all right out there. This is that time of year where I used to live in Texas, and this time of year was my favorite time of year because it was when living in Texas was tolerable from the heat. And living where I'm at now in the Northeast, it's like, man, I see why they invented sun lamps. So hope you guys are doing all right out there. Let's press on and talk about some more tabletop RPG, just weird shit. I love these questions, guys. I'm really excited about them. All right, this is from Xcron. Awesome news. Excellent. Lately, I've been bothered by this. How do I make sure to include all the players into something that is related to one player's backstory? How do I let them know immersively, that is to say, in-game, in character? That's what I'm taking it as. How do I let them know immersively that it is okay? Oh, that's weird. For everyone else as well to interact with the situation. Like, to answer the last question first, like you have other NPCs come up, engage them in the situation. You know, like a fun thing to do is to have, you know, someone in the backstory that is not integral to it, to the other player who is also sort of a witness or just participant in this thing, to come up to one of the other players and be like, isn't this weird? Or just comment on it or something, especially, you know, if the tone or tenor of what's going on in the player's backstory is, you know, more social, or the conflict rather is more social, if there is one. Like, there's a lot of ways to do this, depending on the nature of the side quest based on the other player's backstory nature. You know, it could be that like the rest of the party got involved when this part of the backstory, like, you know, walked in with a figurative or relative or literal bomb and dropped it. You know, like they got involved when they were made involved, when others involved them. That could be one way. You could look for ways in which like elements of that individual player's backstory can be relevant to or touch upon something else. Like, is there some way to link two things that are in individual backstories that the players are kind of fuzzy on, and you feel like, oh, it might be neat to add a little connection there. It's also on everybody else, right? Like, this is the one thing about traditional games like D&D, where the DM has a lot of authority and a lot of like authority in the narrative sense to set the scene and set the frame, right? You don't have real authority because people just walk away, right? But in the sense that you set the tone for the game, you set the agenda for it a lot of times, it's easy to for the rest of the players to just go, well, the DM will figure that out. When it's like, well, if we're doing something in a game session, it really is incumbent upon everyone at the table, if they want to be involved, to suggest ways that they could be involved as well. And so this is why I think, like, it doesn't have to be that these moments are where like one player gets all the spotlight and everybody else is stacking dice or checking their phones or tabbing over to something else or whatever, you know. But you also don't have to do it all at once. You can throw it to them and say, like, what are some ways you guys are interested in this? What are some ways you could see yourselves getting involved? Have ideas of your own, right? Like, it's not all on them either. But there are probably ways in which an element of a backstory can be made relevant to other characters in the party. And that you can have NPCs reach out to them. You can have the backstory elements like push against them, you know. Here's an example I used in one of my games. I had told the players at character creation there were no humans in the campaign, and one of the players wanted to make a human. And I said, okay, if you're going to do that, you've got to give me a really good reason why you're here, right? Like, the humans are gone. So they came up with, they're a clone of an archmage, the seventh attempt, you know. Perfect, excellent. We play through it. We're like, by 8th level is when I finally bring it up. So we're 8 levels in before this becomes relevant. And the 6th version of her decided that she'd have enough and was going to kill the 7th version. And using my NPCs roll stealth against passive perception, you know, just sort of way I play, she got the job. She infiltrated their apartment basically, and had a poison dagger that she stabbed the character with, failed the con roll, and immediately dropped a 0, and then escaped as well. And so for the next like 5 or 6 sessions, they were following after, because like that was going to be it. Like, she was just going to escape. Yep, great. You know, the 7th version of myself taken out. Now I can rest easy. My vengeance is complete. But then the players were like, oh, hell no. And after they healed their friend, which is what the next session was about, right? Go to the special healer, get the special thing, boom, done. Just enough time to give a plausible lead. Now they're racing across the desert, trying to find and track where the NPC is. Where's she going? How do we get there? Just what is going on for some of them. And it took like 8 or 9 sessions to play out before they finally did. And it involved this like giant showdown in a town, sort of like Old West style, where another player, another PC was killed with a finger of death spell. And while they were also impregnated with a blue slot egg. And, you know, they had nothing to do with it. They were just involved in this, and it escalated. And, but it was like, we had laid the groundwork for that at when we started playing it at level 3, by the fact that everyone was like interested in the character's backstory, because we had worked to make it kind of fit the setting and everything. And everyone else played in such a way that they were like involved in each other's personal stuff, so that when it came time to focus on one of the players, it wasn't like they were the only one in that spotlight. There were others in the party who were there with them as supporting characters in that sense. So it's everybody's thing. I feel like I'm rambling here, but it's something that the group builds together. And if not, you handle it quick and move on, because you don't want to take up too much table time. You know, sometimes it is just one player. You handle it as fast as you can, and then, you know, get on with it. Or solo session, that, you know, something like that. But yeah, good question. All right, more dead air coming up. The silence. All right. Here we go. I have no idea what time it is. Oh yeah, okay. That's what time it is. Twist and turn? Twist and turn you. Hello, WebDM. I'd like to ask, how do you handle and or scale skill challenges effectively as the PCs increase in level, particularly bards and expertise-based classes? For example, a roll of 22 or higher has become perceived a guarantee of success by the players. But however, PC is at a point where they regularly roll in the high 20s. Yep, I bet they do, with their expertise and guidance and advantage and all that other bit. Anyway, to raise the skill challenge number feels like a devaluation of their progress. But it feels like skill challenges are just too easy for them now as they hit higher tier. Thanks for all the content over the years, et cetera, et cetera. Appreciate that that final bit there. Yeah, they're just gonna, and I think that like you got to just you've got to start taking that into account, especially as like rogues get reliable talent and essentially have like a floor of competency that you know, like other members of the party may still struggle to pass those checks. Like that's why these players play these characters. And like D&D has a very rudimentary basic skill system. For the most part, it is binary pass fail, and it's very just sort of light and airy. There's not a lot of concreteness to the skill challenge aspect of 5e, such as it is, right? Like how long does it take? What are the consequences? All of that is in your hands, DM. So it is as meaningful as you're able to make it and keep it fresh and all that stuff, right? Not maybe easy, could be not. I stopped worrying about it. Like, and just assumed, yeah, every time this rogue says I hide, like their baseline is, you know, whatever, 17 or I don't know, you know, whatever it was at the time. Like that's their minimum, and it quickly gets to be much higher. I remember playing a rogue with a passive perception of like 28, which is, you know, enough to perceive just about anything in the monster manual if it tries to be stealthy. And so I just stopped focusing on those little things. And that aspect of the game ceased to become a central part of play until there was something there that could challenge that particular character. And the fact that like the more mundane challenges ceased to be challenges was fine. Like the game, it's part of like getting higher level and the like, right? It's part of the fact that, you know, by the time you're in your mid-teens as a character, some of the more just like down in the dirt aspects of adventuring are just like, I don't, if this is, even if my character might take a little longer and they sometimes fail and like they're not perfect and great all the time, like as an element of play, there's just more interesting stuff going on now at this level. And so it's like you got to find other ways to challenge them, right? For that bard, right? The skill challenges they're working on are other bards who can match their modifiers and go toe to toe in an opposed roll, right? For same for like rogues and the like rogues at these levels, it's like, what are you doing worrying about mundane locks and traps and things like that? Like you've got to go to like the god of locks and beat their temple. You know, like that's how you make a name at this level, by doing these things. It's you know, oh, that merchant in Deepwater says I'll never be able to get in that vault. Yeah, right. Yeah, when he's gonna wake up with all of his money in his bed because that's where I put it. You know, like I think those are the kinds of things that those level of bards and rogues and expertise-based classes. Same for rangers, right? Like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, they're in their favorite environment, like they can't get lost. I'm like, yeah, because that's their shtick, that's their thing, and like fighters and barbarians and other martial classes tend to do well in combat, and casters tend to do good in all aspects of the game because they have spells. And I think it's okay. And the easier thing to do is like reframe the kinds of challenges you're offering so that the players are still getting that hit, that engaging in that part of the game, but that the challenges and everything are leveling up with it. And the more mundane stuff they were worried about and having to struggle to overcome, and then that feel of like, yes, I can reliably get into my, you know, mid to high 20s with these numbers. Like, yeah, that's spoken for now. A fighter doesn't worry about goblins too much either, you know. expand your idea of what a skill challenge can be and give them something worthy of their modifiers to go up against. Not all the time, but enough of the time that it's satisfying for them. It might take a while to calibrate that and figure out what exactly the details of that are, because it's player preference and the like. But that's how I handle those kind of situations, because they're going to be casually destroying impossible DCs while someone else in the party is struggling to hit a medium DC in the same task. So it's you got to keep things varied so that the game runs smoothly, I think. All right, here we go. I see there's some talk of Pathfinder and thing. I probably, I don't know that I'll ever. I've read it. I've read the second edition. There's a lot of words in it. So Hooverful, this is a great question, because I get to talk about myself. What are your top experiences as a DM, as a player, and as a D&D content creator? Love to hear your own tales. Thank you. Love the question. Like, a lot of great experiences as a DM, because I keyed in early on that, like, if I wanted to play this game, if I wanted to be part of it, then the best way to do that was to ensure I was always willing and ready to run a game. And so it was always like, I want to do this. And so I've had a lot of great experiences as a DM. Had a lot of terrible ones, but those didn't stop me. But I think my best, like, top experience as a DM was sort of like mid 3.5, when the shine had worn off and the burden of prepping full character stat blocks for NPCs and the like had started to really get to me. I found a game or a campaign from Goodman Games called Castle White Rock. It was this like big box set kind of thing, and I had been running mostly homebrew stuff up until that point, and was at the time under the belief that pre-written things would be easier to run. I do not believe that. I don't know why it is. Maybe for some people, but it wasn't for me. But this particular game was just what our group needed. It was a mega dungeon in the truest sense, that you could go from level 1 through 20, would never leave the dungeon or the town next to it, which we didn't really, except in little side jaunts once they got teleport and things like that. And for the most part, there was no real like carefree attitude. It wasn't like what sometimes happens in a big mega dungeon, where there's not an attachment that builds up with the world. I did a lot to place the mega dungeon in the world and describe the immediate surroundings of it, so that it was embedded in this place, and that when bits of the lore or other stuff that were in it would come out, I could point to a map and or something, or I could reference something in a character's backstory that was relevant. And it like, because they had done all the work of like putting the mechanics together for 5e and done like that, I could just like read it and put the whole thing together and sort of run it. And some weeks I was like, I don't even know what we did. Like I was reading, as I ran it was the first time I read this thing. I have no idea if I did it right. And other times I fully prepped it and was ready to go. But like, there's a point in a lot of campaigns where the impetus of low level has worn off. The newness of the characters of the campaign, all of that has worn off. We've maybe hit a couple of bumps in the campaign in terms of what do we do now? Where's the bad guy? We don't know what's going on. What should we pursue, kind of thing. And if you're not able to get over that hump, then that's usually where a campaign will stall out, because like other things become bigger priority, and it's like, oh well, I guess I got canceled this week because I got to do something else, or just feel tired. Last week was just such a drag, that kind of thing. And it didn't happen with this one. We just kept going, and the momentum kept building, and there was always something new introduced, because every time it gets stale, we'd go to a new level of the dungeon. It would be completely different. And there are all new challenges and everything else to worry about. And then they'd leave the dungeon, and I'd show the impact that their actions inside of it had on the outside world. And it was just a really good experience, and it showed me the way in which like players can contribute to long-term campaign, and like me having enough detail that I can make it interesting, and they can bite and hold on to something, but not so much detail that they can't carve out a space for themselves in the world by saying like, no, this is what my halflings are like that I came from, and like how I act is I'm setting an expectation of the world by this particular character portrayal, or something in the backstory like would get fleshed out through play, and we'd mark it down to the campaign Bible as like this is true for the world now. It was just really good. I really enjoyed it. And it's the one when I asked those players like, what's your favorite gaming moment, they still talk about that one, and I was like, really, that's just the Mega Dungeon 3.5. Yep. And so I like that one. And then let's see. So as a player, I specifically with Dungeons and Dragons, I got a lot out of playing original D&D a few years ago, as a playing a magic user, 3d6 straight down the line, no supplements, original D&D, and just had an absolute blast. I got to play with some people who had never played RPGs before. This was their first experience in like 2014 or 13, of playing an RPG, and like just getting to like deal with, okay, I've got 3 hit points and 1 spell and like no armor class. I have a lot of gold because I don't have to buy armor. So I pay henchmen to protect me and people to carry around torches and stuff like that. But like as the game grew, the DM really adapted to the play style that we sort of developed over time. And there are moments where I'd put a group of dwarves to sleep with a sleep spell and tell them I actually killed them, and then the one that didn't is, terrified. And I'm like, well, if you work for us, I won't kill you like these others that I killed. And then just like one of the other players going like, wait, we can lie to the dungeon master. Like our characters can lie to our friend, this real life person right here. I was like, yeah, they could lie. I was like, I have no idea how effective it is, but yeah, that's what my character says. He tells those dwarves he just killed their friends, and he'll do it if he doesn't tell them everything about the lich that lives 3 levels down and the next part of the dungeon. So it was just really classic, and it helped me understand a lot about D&D as a game and what I like about it as a player. And it's just it's weird little game. It's you have to constantly look at the rules and scratch your head and go, what in the world is this referring to? And have to piece it out together. But it allowed us to build a really cool game that fit the table, and it was fun. That character never died. Played that same character to 7th level, and never died. So I'm quite proud of it. But yeah, and then I'd say as a content creator, definitely the work we're doing now on Weird Wastelands of essentially like building an exploration pillar for 5e as is, as it exists now, not, sort of remaking 5e around it, but being like, what can we do with 5e as it exists, and creating something that's going to be interesting, not just to people who want to play in a gonzo post-apocalyptic, carefree kind of manner, but like for maybe anybody who is interested in having an exploration pillar that produces interesting situations for players to make decisions in. Right, like in the same way that combat does and social interaction does. Like I wanted the same thing out of exploration, of like, this gets you into situations. You either find resources that you can use for later, or in the attempt to do that, something complicates the matter. And like to show that what's really fun about wilderness is something that's otherwise like really absent from the game, because you never have to worry about fighting off a bunch of scavengers when your characters go hunting in the wilds, or you never have to worry about the horses that you're with getting something caught in their shoe. And while it's sort of mundane things like that, at other times it's like it's much more magical in nature, no pun intended. But yeah, I'm really proud of that, and I can't wait to show it off. And the light at the end of that tunnel gets bigger and bigger every day. So hopefully soon you guys will be able to enjoy it. All right. How you guys doing out there? You all right? All right. Let's see. Colville said that about Castle White Rock. It was confusing. I had to do a lot of work to be like, wait a minute, how does this work? But I gutted the background, and so it made a lot of that much easier. All right, this is from Knight Errant. Here we go. As a DM who has only ever run 5e adventure modules, the idea of running a homebrew campaign in a homebrew setting seems both exciting and intimidating. What should a DM know before embarking on creating a fully homebrew campaign? And what would your top tips be for said DM? Give me just a moment. Excuse me. Goodness. All right. So my first tip would be to take whatever idea for a homebrew campaign you think you have and really examine both it, in what you think it is, where that idea comes from, and like consider getting rid of all or parts of it. And the reason I say this, despite not really knowing what you have in mind, is that my impression of the expectations here, based on lifetime of playing and reading about this stuff, is like that you probably expect way too much of what it entails to run a homebrew setting and campaign. And like there's a sort of opposite school of thought of like, I run my campaigns out of one index card and whatever I come up with off the top of my head and a D6. And it's like, sure you do, whatever. There's work involved in a homebrew campaign, even one that's minimally prepped and run mostly improv, because you have to prepare to improvise, right? Like you have to be ready to do it. So it just doesn't take the level of exhaustive detail that is in most mainstream traditional 5e campaign settings out there, both the ones that Wizards of the Coast puts out and third-party homebrew, et cetera. Those are big, glossy, full cover, exhaustively detailed. They tell you a bunch of stuff about the world from like an encyclopedic sense, but not many of them tell you how to put that in a session on on an adventuresome plate for your party to engage with. And that's what you need in a homebrew setting. You need situations, scenarios. Everything you create for the setting yourself is geared towards putting it in front of the players and going, play with this, please. This is interesting. And because it's homebrew and you're tailoring it for these specific players, the more you get to know them, the more you get to know their tastes, their preferences, what they like, what they don't like. Maybe you talk about those kind of things. Hopefully you do, just as friends or as DM to players even. Like the more you can tailor what you create for that. And in most like published campaign settings, there's just a bunch of trivia that never makes it to the table. Is word count filler. And you could probably boil most of them down to a quarter of their size of useful information. And like the thing is that useful is very context-based and individual. And what I find garbage, another DM is gold. And so like the people publishing those books make them big because who knows what an individual purchaser will want out of that. But you know what you need for your group, what they're going to latch onto in the background of stuff. Like, do you need to know the family history of every noble in this kingdom or whatever? No, you don't. Like, you don't even need to know the name of the king. You just need a name for the place because they're never going to meet the king unless that's what the game's about, in which case make them up as an NPC. Focus on what you're going to have for the first part of the campaign. a couple of sites of adventure, right? Stuff that interests you, stuff that interests them, interests your players, things that are tied to their character backgrounds, their classes, parts of the backstory that they've revealed to you, that kind of thing. Don't start big, just need a sentence or two for each one, just to give you enough to go on with your comfort level of improv. And the more you do it and the more you play in this world, which is another reason not to scrap it and start over the next time you do a campaign, just add to this one, right? Just build another layer on it, pick another area that isn't explored yet and build there. And then, you keep it up and play long enough, you'll find that you have an organically developed campaign world that's based entirely upon things that have happened in games you've run. And that you can look back at setting notes and material that you've provided for it and see like, oh, this is something me and my group created together. And it's not like perfect. It's not a graphic novel or a show or something like that, but it's yours. And you made that, you and your friends did. And so start small, as small of a scope as you want, right? That could be like local village D&D, where it's a small little village and a podunk tavern and a couple of old dungeons that still got some bones and gold piece left in them, or it could be something else entirely. But start with what you're going to need for those first few sessions and build outward from there. All you have to do is stay one step ahead of them, right? Be as consistent as you can, because that's going to help the world feel real, and it's going to prevent contradictions that are going to mess with your game later on. You will make decisions that mess with world building, that complicate things. So you're going to have to get comfortable with saying, I made a mistake, I'm retconning that. Let's fix this tomorrow, right? Just accept that it's going to happen and move on. And you don't have to have it all mapped out unless it's fun for you. Unless it's fun, and then do it because it's fun. And just remember that the stuff you prep for play might be different than the stuff you're doing for yourself for fun. That won't see it in the game. But for me personally, the fun stuff, the lonely fun of DMing, the backstory of the world, the lore, fuels what I create for a game. And so a lot of my prep is creating that foundation for myself, because I like that level of detail when I create it. But it's only useful for the game and only makes it into the game when it's going to be relevant to what we're doing in it. I keep it, as inspiration as opposed to clutter, if that makes any sense. But yeah, it seems intimidating, but you probably are thinking you have to have a giant 250-page campaign Bible before you can start, and you don't. You need a couple pages of notes and a willingness to just keep practicing and staying one step ahead. It's also way easier. Oh God, you don't have to do any reading. It's all stuff that interests you and your friends. You don't have to reskin stuff. Also you get to steal from all the other campaign settings and just put it in your own, yeah. Appreciate the tips, guys. This is fun. We should have done this a long time ago, but we not as if we didn't talk about it. But yeah, I'll keep going. I think I got about maybe 4 or 5 more in me, depending. I will only get more and more rambling as this goes on. If anybody's familiar with our Patreon and the like, you'll know. We had also talked about this book that we're writing. I'm sure you guys know, but for those of you who may or may not, we are writing a book. It's almost done. Can pre-order it. Pretty sure all that's in the description for the video. But if not, Emma is on it in the chat. So yeah, I'll see how many more I can get through. Right, it'll be a challenge. Here we go. Flying Cactus asks, when you GM. Oh, never mind. Okay, this was one. All right, this is how it's going to go. So these two are related. That's right. Okay, get it together, Jim. Flying Cactus asks, when you GM, are you able to balance the clarity of describing a scene's detail with the sort of mood you're expecting it to evoke? Not always. By being detailed and clear in my description, I hope for my players to interpret the mood. and then list a few of them. Example, the mood in their own imagination, which has had mixed success. How do you sell your scenes to players? And if so, how? Do you sell your scenes to your players? And if so, how? My ability to read is about to plummet, by the way, folks. So bear with me. Jay Gray also asks, what's the most effective way to handle descriptions? Are there any good exercises you can do to get better at them? How do you handle them when you're running a theater of the mind game? Do you have any principles for deciding what's most important to describe? So I think both of these are very like related questions here. And like for me, my description process starts out with like general first. I'm going to use the idea of the principle of a dungeon room because I think like it is very universal, right? We could be describing a social scene at a party or something that's the setup, or a place in the wilderness or something. But for this, we're going to use dungeon room. And like the first thing is like I'm just going to describe what type of room it is. This is an antechamber. This is a torture chamber. This is an audience hall. This is a privy. This is a gallery. Whatever. For me to do this well, it required that I develop a bit of a vocabulary of architecture. But I already liked architecture and took a bunch of architectural drafting classes in high school. So I already, it's already something I'm interested in. Do as much of that as you like until you have something more than just this is a room. By naming the room's type, it immediately sets in the mind what it is to the player, even if they can't tell the difference between a vestibule and an antechamber, right? Like the word itself begins to set the stage. And then as the players interact with that more, I add more detail. So I don't want to overwhelm them at first. I don't want them to have to sit there and listen to a bunch of pre-written text that I wrote or the adventure module did. So I'll be like, it's this type of room, and here are the major features. If there's any kind of threat, mortal threat that is about to attack them and roll initiative, that is the first thing. It's an antechamber with a bunch of enemies that are about to attack you. Roll initiative, right? And then as we're fighting or putting out a battle map or whatever, I'll lay out the terrain. But like, I just want to let them know that like, this is the type of thing that it is. So their mind is primed, and then they can start going, well, I know what's in a torture chamber because I am imagining it. And that lets them go, well, is there an X in it? Right? You're in a market square of a small village town. Okay. Is there someone who makes weapons here? That's a valid question. There might not be anybody that does that because this is just not what this settlement of this size can handle, right? Like, I find like that method worked really well, as opposed to like the exhaustive description method, because like if they don't care, if they're just going to head straight through this, we haven't wasted a bunch of time on description, and that's fine. If they are going to spend time here, then we'll get to that description. I don't need to load it down at the very beginning. They could go, well, what's in this room? All right, boom, 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 boom. These are the major things, as if you were standing, you have to imagine it in your mind's eye and describe it. And as for the second question of like, are there any exercises for this? I do this all day, every day. Like, this is how I keep my mind busy and focused sometimes, to give it something to think about and focus on, like a dog with a chew toy, so that like it doesn't go off and think about something that's going to derail me for the rest of the day. So like if I'm walking, if I'm going about my day or whatever, I'm coming into this room. How would I describe this room coming into it? If I'm going for a walk, this was one of those things where like just going out in nature and taking a walk can be great, because it just be like, all right, well, these people that are coming at me on the other side of the trail, what if they were this? How would I describe them? Or this part of the forest that I'm going through, what if this was where the ambush happens? Well, how would I describe this moment before I ask for initiative? And that's just like, in that sense, you're always prepping to be a DM because you're just drawing from your own experiences. And it's one of the reasons I think that the longer you do it, the more you can stick with it, the better you'll get, just because you have more shit to draw on. It's tough to DM when you're new, especially if you're young, because you just had less of life, and that's okay. You'll get there. But that's like the best thing I learned to do, was to just like in my own life, just go, well, how would I describe that thing over there? How would I describe it as clearly and concisely as I can? And then in terms of establishing mood, it's about vocabulary. Like, can I use other words other than creepy? What other words can I use to describe something? And I'll be honest, a lot of times my DM prep is prepping lists of adjectives so that I have that for me when I'm describing things. But yeah, it's. I hope that helps. There's a lot to it. I think it's a fundamental DM skill, but yeah, that's how I do it. I also, if they imagine it otherwise, it's fine. It's okay for me because it's weird how this game is basically like we all are asking you to imagine the same thing, but that's literally impossible, I think, like, because we're all just in our heads. So you just have to accept that what it looks like to them is going to be different than how you imagine it, and open yourself up to a play style that the players can really ask about the world around them and you describe it. And if that means you never roll dice or you don't roll them for a while, well, that's okay, because they're exploring the world. They want to know all kinds of things about it. So that's to me, that's a really good moment of gaming. I like those moments. All right. Let's see. Here we go. Blaze Pond. Yeah. All right. Wishing you all well during this time. Thank you. Appreciate it, Blaze Pond. We are well, or on the mend at least, and appreciate the support there. Says, how do you keep the sense of threat and grit that the world has in the early levels of a campaign, presumably of Dungeons and Dragons? How do you keep that going as the stakes rise and the action of the players becomes more fantastic and larger scaled? For instance, skeletons at level 2 feel very real and satisfying, but a flying spaceship out of the atmosphere or fighting alien starships alongside dragons feels epic, but airy and weightless. And yes, agreed. It does for me too, Blaze Pond. I am not so good at the later stages of the campaign as the threads I have put in place reach their epic climaxes. Yeah, you might, like, there's a lot of reasons for that. I know for me personally, there's a lot of things that sound fun to do, and then you look at how you would implement them and just like, specifically for D&D, a lot of this has to do with, like, they don't really offer support for theater of the mind in a lot of these things for, judging distances and areas and the like without using maps or visual aids. Action economy and just the sheer number of options and decision points that everybody has to make in combat can really bog down a lot of these epic ideas. So there's a strong incentive to just hand wave a lot of things for the DM. Which I think, to me personally, contributes to that airy and weightless feeling when it's just like, they hit each other, they're fighting, and yeah, like, that's because at level 2, those skeletons are real and satisfying, and like, to make that work at level 13, 17, 20, whatever, like, it takes a lot of just sort of bookkeeping and information juggling on the DM's part, I think, because, like, it's easy for those skeletons at level 2 to have mechanical weight and to feel threatening and satisfying because there's real stakes at play. Even if those stakes eventually get overused, and a lot of people don't like losing their characters, it's like still real. And I think, like, we're talking about that flying a spaceship out of the atmosphere and the space dragons and the whatever, like, there has to be a possibility that they fail. There has to be a possibility that the spaceship comes crashing down into the atmosphere and the dragon alongside it, because the alien whatevers are better, or they were waiting for it. Like, and I think that's hard to pull off at that level because you're dealing with characters that you've been playing for a while, and they have a lot of resources at their disposal, just personally, and depending on how the campaign's gone, in terms of, like, the people they know, connections, things of the world. So being able to match that and to see how you can still have that, that there could be stakes that can be real, that it can, the outcome of the event isn't decided yet, there's still tension. You have to risk this thing you've been building for a long time of it not going the way that everybody wants it to go, or of something happening that will derail the game. And so for me, I handled this by like, I stopped caring about specific outcomes or a specific way to steer the game, so long as it looked like everybody was having a good time, right? And telling me that when I asked. But at the same time, realizing that like, I can't softball it. And the urge to will be there, because I don't want to like break this special thing we're building together, these characters and this, this world, this narrative. I don't want it to end, but like for it to continue to be satisfying, it has to be at stake somehow, something about it. And I think like for me, it really was a matter of like, the whole thing doesn't need to end, but individual parts of it can. The stakes of individual conflicts need to escalate, but there is more than just like the end of the character or the end of the party on the line. It's like, yes, you couldn't get exactly what you wanted. Your enemies, your foils, your rivals thwarted you this time, right? What's your next move? Or yes, you've achieved victory now, but what are you going to do? Rest on your laurels? Like your rivals are coming for you, and so it's a matter of like, just, I really don't like advice answers that are like, just play more. But as you play more, as you get comfortable with and better able to see those things that could be at stake, other than does this game continue or not with these characters, that you'll be able to have stakes that feel real. And then the trick is to like find ways to support that mechanically that don't bog the game down, which might mean changing the game, making changes to it, or finding ways to play it more effectively. But I think to me, like the situation you're describing when it's happened to me has been because my imagination outstripped my willingness and effort in that particular moment. Because it's one thing to go like, oh man, it'd be so cool for the spaceship to be going, and then everybody's riding this, and then the enemy's coming in, and then it comes to playing it, it's like, shit, I got 20 things to track as a GM, and like multiple legendary creatures, and like all my players are, why did I give them all dragons? What's with the spaceship? Like, and that's when a moment where it can deflate and just feel like your guys are just telling a story without like just round robin style, and it stops feeling like a game to me. So I hope that helps, Blazepond. I think really is about like reframing the stakes of the conflict and keeping them appropriate and scaling them, but having them be something other than just the game ends. Go after the goals that the players want, the things that they have, that kind of thing, and not like whether they get to continue to play their character or not. So, yeah. All right. Guys doing good. Glad to see it. Oh, there's a poll. Jeez. All right. Goodness. Here we go. Got a couple more in me. Oh my. All right. Okay. All right. Maybe I can not ramble as much. Yeah. Right. Sanjeev asks, hey Jim, love your videos. I find it always inspired after watching them. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. My question relates to the situation where you as a GM have a cool idea for a player, a plot point you want them to grab onto, but they just don't seem interested. Do you drop it or have a chat with the player, keep the plot going? If they don't seem interested, it's getting dropped. The question here for me really is like, is this something that I've introduced because I'm picking up on something I think they want? In which case I'm going to talk to them about it. Like, hey, you seemed uninterested in this thing, but like your backstory that you sent in, like you jumped through my hoops, so I read it. Like I did my best to incorporate parts of it into the game. It's a good way to get players engaged. And so like there have been times when they're like, hey, excuse me. There have been times when I'm like, hey, I'm picking up on an interest in this, and this is my attempt to engage with that, and you don't seem to be biting. That's kind of a last resort, throw them right, sort of trying to fix this thing a moment, trying to get my brain back on track for a minute. But the real question there is like, what is it about it that they don't seem interested in? And if it's because like they're not picking up that you're trying to engage with something that they're interested in and created this for them, then that's worth pointing out. But it could also just be that they're not interested. And like, if they're not interested, they're not interested. And there's a school of DM thought that's like, okay, so they ignored this plot point. Well, it just continues on in the background, and gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And that keeps butting its head in and butting its head in. Like, geez, we could have dealt with that necromancer at level 3, but now we're here at level 10 and it's still a problem. But like, we've said no every time. We're not interested in dealing with necromancers this time, it could be that. So I think like, if it seems weird to you, if this is something that you thought they would be interested in and would pursue, and this is like your good faith attempt to engage something that they have signaled to you they're interested in and they're not biting, that's where the talk. If this is just something you came up with and you keep throwing it at them through quest hooks and rumors and NPCs wanting them to do stuff, and every time they're like, no thanks, then it's time to put it in the back pocket. Let it just sit in a folder somewhere. Let the idea be dispersed through other ideas in your game. There's no such thing as wasted prep in terms of like you created a hook or an element or something like that. You just save it for later. Revisit it later when the context has changed, when their interests have changed, that kind of thing. That's how I would handle those things. Because like as a DM, you're coming up with stuff all the time that your players are going like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. And so being able to have a bit of a thick skin about your, your creative output, right? The things that you find interesting and enjoyable and want to present to people that you want to entertain, it can really suck to know that they're just not interested in that. But that's okay. And it's okay for them to express that, and like being able to say like, yeah, that's okay. It's all right. There's more ideas. We're always able to come up with new ideas, and save them for later, put them down somewhere and revisit them at a different point, change them up a bit. That's perfectly fine. But it sucks. It can really suck to be like, I thought this was going to be cool and you guys aren't interested. But like those are those things that like later on somebody's like, hey, what happened to that one thing we never looked up in, or it comes up after this campaign's over and it gets incorporated into the next one. There's all kinds of ways that ideas can have a second life. So yeah, there you go. All right, this one's another special one for me because it's about military history and Pendragon. All right, so this one's from John, and I think I'm gonna get this one and maybe one more before I head out. But appreciate it, man. I just saw it there in chat. Always love a bit of encouragement. John writes, when it comes to characters being part of a military organization or feudal structure, thinking specifically of the Pendragon game that I play in, what would you consider when it comes to balancing player agency with the obligations and accountability the players have to NPC authorities? Yeah, so I'm going to speak from my experience on Pendragon because that's the one that for me personally, this has come up the most in. For those of you who don't know, I have a master's degree in military history, specifically like English, early modern and late medieval military history. So yeah, like Pendragon is a game that is merging the like fantasy romance of Arthurian literature from the 12th through 14th centuries about literal knights in shining armor and chivalric romance, and like this is where all of that stuff has its beginning before it's lampooned and played out and all that stuff by the time it's the 20th century. And so like they're trying to merge that with like, no, this is what it was actually like to be a knight on a manor. Like the Pendragon has some very detailed books on like acreage and how many fields you have, and like they simplify that information into a very usable and very enjoyable system. But they went into a lot of detail to make the material reality of being a knight something you have to juggle with living up with these chivalric ideals of being like a knight in shining armor. And it's what makes for such a compelling game. And they're not shy about saying you don't get to do what you want. No one in this society gets to do what they want. This is the Middle Ages, And it's one of those things that I think that really sets a game like Dungeons and Dragons apart, because Dungeons and Dragons is set like in a Ren Fair theme park. This isn't really the Middle Ages in a D&D world. There's not serfs. You don't, if it was, you wouldn't be allowed in anywhere, because a group of armed strangers coming into town would see everyone try to chase you out. You don't know any of these people. They don't know you. Why did you come into town armed and armored? So like, to me, it's a very natural thing that when you're playing in settings that borrow from the past, the personal freedom that a character who lives in that world, a person that lives in that world enjoys, is going to be limited. So the player agency is going to be contextualized. In a game like Pendragon, we can tell our Lord to go fuck off when he tells us to give us 40 days of nightly service, right? There's nothing stopping us from going, no, Earl, I'm not going to show up with my squire and the 2 knights that I'm also responsible for and the 7 archers that I brought. I'm not going to do that. That's expensive. Those are my men. And we would play that out. And Pendragon has examples of that and sort of like tells you what the repercussions are for if the players decide to do that. The players can also be corrupt agents of the court, and the players can squeeze peasants to get as much, labor out of them. It gives you a lot of freedom to do it, but it doesn't give you consequence-free freedom. And that's what makes for compelling gameplay. So I think like if you're going to run a game where it seems as though the player's agency would be curtailed, it's important to emphasize like they're exercising agency when they say, yeah, we agree to be bossed around by our NPC superior, because that's the game we're playing. That's how they exercise their agency. And then they're going to exercise their agency at the smaller level when you're dealing with whatever encounter or problem that you're supposed to solve for your superiors, and how you approach it and the outcome of it. All of that's still up in the air. But just because they're given marching orders from someone doesn't mean that there's not other ways they can introduce agency to their game. Because to be honest, there's a lot of groups that already play like this, and it has nothing to do with being part of a feudal structure or military organization. It's the DM says this is what we're going to do because that's what they prepped. Everybody's okay with it. And the players understand that like if they want to play and they're going to play this thing the DM prepped, and they have latitude in how they approach that. But this is their friend who has their own life outside of DMing, doesn't have an infinite amount of time. They don't want to mess up this guy's plans or this person's plans by going left and off book. That's a choice they're making, and that's a valid choice for a valid play style. And so like it's a real I think it's one of those things where looking at the level of player agency that you're making room for and that you're comfortable with is important no matter what kind of game you run. And it's there in a game that would be highly hierarchical, and your players, would have their freedoms curtailed. To return to Pendragon, it's only 40 days that the king gets as part of an oath of loyalty. They only get 40 days, unless they pay your character. And outside of that, you have some other things you have to do. If you're a member of like your liege's court, say you arrange the hunts for your earl, that's a big deal, right? That's big news. Are you with him when he gets dressed? That's big. your character has made it in that case. And the rules say, yeah, you probably aren't adventuring. You should play a younger brother who doesn't have those kind of responsibilities, if that's the kind of knight you want to play. And it's the same for any other thing where your characters are part of an organization or structure. They don't always get to choose their free time. Doesn't mean they get along with people around them, that there's not conflict there, that there's not things they want that they've got to get within that structure. That's where the tension and the moments of play can come from. Or when they tell them to fuck off and then they deal with the consequences. That's always fun. Last night, my character was held in a prison just for questioning, wasn't even under arrest, but he was a known associate of a wanted murderer, one of the other party members. And I deliberately went to the town where our fellow party member was named and name dropped that person, name dropped him. I was like, oh yeah, Gray's, this is Gray. Yeah. Cops show up, bounty hunter, sheriff, real Old West vibe. And my character has armor that can't be taken off. It's bonded to his skin. So he's like, yeah, I'll go peacefully. Takes the stuff. He's like, I'm not guilty. And he had reason to believe that he'd be fine. The rest of the party was like, we got to jail bust this guy out of jail. They're going to kill him. And no, they were going to let me go in the morning after they just talked to me. But party members didn't know that. And they ripped the wall off the jail with a rapid growing tree. And I was like, we have friends like that. You gotta take the opportunity. I know I wasn't under arrest, but they did have me in a jail cell. So I escaped. And it sucks because I had to leave all my stuff behind except the armor. But them's the breaks. Those are the events through which adventure is made and good stories are told about these games. So there you go. All right. Okay. All right. What did I say? One more? I don't remember. Who's asking for consistency? All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. Last one. This is a good one. Thank you, Emma. Did I say that? I don't know. I want to do one more. It's my channel. Kind of, not just mine, but you know what I mean. All right. Hey, I'm Alec asks, hey, Jim. Hey, Jim, DM of a long-term campaign. I have some trouble with pacing. This will be the last question, by the way. I'll hold myself to be consistent. My players are very active role players, which is great. But there's a lot going on in the story, and it causes the game to crawl forward at a snail's pace. And at times, I'm not always sure if they're filling the time with their role play or role playing to fill the time. That's a good observation. Very good observation. Similar moments for myself. Next session, I'm going to talk to them about it and see what they think of the current pace. But aside from any tips for how to subtly nudge things along, without being too disruptive. Excuse me. So yeah, there could be things that you're doing that contribute to this. If there's a lot of just like looking things up, or oh, excuse me, guys, I had this written down somewhere. Give me a second. Like that can happen. Or if what I find a lot of times in my games when this happens is the decision point that the players need to reach is either unclear or so messy that they need guidance working through it. And this was one of those things as a DM that I found like really tripped me up, because I was like, well, I don't want to put my hand on the scale, right, of play and tip things one way or the other. I see myself as like a neutral arbiter of the game world in a sense. But when you let the players take the lead in what they do and in how they both like control where they go in the game world and in the campaign, and like what happens in any individual session, there can be moments where so many consequences and repercussions and stuff just pour on that moment that it's just like, wait, what do we do? How like, what's the plan? How do we get through this? And there are 5, 6, however many people, 3, trying to reach a decision on how to move forward, and maybe no one of them wants to come forward and be the decider, the leader. And it might take just asking a very direct question that can't be answered yes or no to them, What goal are you headed towards now? And what's your first move? Right. That's a very specific question. They might not know the goal, so they might not be able to tell you, but if they can't answer it, it tells you where to start, right? In helping them work through it. So lay all their options out. Remind them that they are not limited to what you suggest, right? But don't be surprised if they take one of the options you suggest because they're looking for something. And I think just accepting that these things occasionally will happen. It is going to pull everybody out of whatever immersion level that they're in, whatever that means for them. But like, surely that's preferable to the game completely stalling, So if that's what's going on and they are role playing as a way to put off that decision because it's too messy or unclear or what, then that's worth talking about, because too much of that will kill a game. If they're having a good time role playing their characters and just inhabiting their personas and chatting and the like in quiet times of the game, like, I think it's worth letting your preference be known, and that's a person to person thing. Always mix a little sweet with the bitter of it. Let them know what you like about it. Let them know how it impacts how you run the game, that kind of thing. But also let them know that there are moments when you're ready to move on and get to the next thing, and you're looking for a way to do it that isn't going to throw them out of this moment. But you need to find a way that's going to be like, all right, here's our 2-minute warning on this role play, whatever. Because as a player, I like these moments. As a DM, I think they're crucial to the pacing of the campaign, having quiet moments where the characters can be characters with each other. But they're also, depending on the kind of players you have, can be really just like, wow, we spent 15 minutes bantering in character when we did that last week too. For me, that was always a moment where I, as a player, I was like, I'm ready to move on. And it's always worth talking about because there might be another player who feels the same way. You certainly feel the same way. Getting some clarity about why they're, what this is about will help you. But either way, like, it's worth talking to them about. And they're going to be the ones who will let you know, like, how to give them a subtle clue that it's time to move things along, because that's what you got to ask them. I can't answer for them. But yeah, the only other thing I would look at is pay attention that you're not missing their cue, that they were ready to move on and you're just missing it. That can happen too, where the DM just doesn't pick up that a decision has been made and like the players are ready to move on and they think, that you're doing something else. You didn't hear them or something. And so they're just sort of role playing until it's ready. That's another thing that's happened to me personally. I was just like, oh yeah, I didn't hear you that time. Thanks. So yeah. All right. This was my last one. I'm going to take this drink. I'm going to say goodbye. All right. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Looks good. And I hope you guys are doing well out there. We're going to be doing another one of these next week. So I believe we'll just keep that same community post up. You can just post your questions there and we'll catch them. And even if we don't get to them, they go into the hopper and become grist for the mill. So they're always appreciated. And I'd much rather talk about stuff that you guys are curious about or interested in, than just about the contents of my own brain. So until next week, hope you guys have a good one. And thanks for coming out. Talk to you later. Bye.